quickly reached the 4th month of this online semester. October on campus is a very, very eventful month for us because we celebrate Prameya every year right before Navratri. And we celebrate Prameya to commemorate the World UN Habitat Day. It's a 3-day event where the idea is to encourage discussions on the possibility of various possibilities of understanding the human settlements and the environment around it. With that, I would now request the Student Council of Faculty of Planning to give an introduction to this time's theme.
Thank you, Vidisha. Good evening to the esteemed guests, the faculties, our alumni, all my fellow students. I am Manoj. As a student representative, I am very pleased to initiate the event. On the behalf of the Student Council, we are excited to witness such an exuberant response to our very first annual event. Prameya, which is organized by Student Initiative Faculty of Planning, CEPT University. This year theme revolves around the cities for people, where we focus on equity and equality in people's rights to cities and its resources. Furthermore, we will try to understand several factors that influence the creation of sustainable cities where life can flourish. Before moving further, we would like to conduct a virtual diya lighting ceremony. For those who are acquainted, I will be pleased to elaborate on its significance. According to the Indian tradition, a lamp or a diya is lit before the commencement of any event, due to an underlying belief that the presence of light will allow for the positivity and success of the event. I would like to present the virtual clipping. Parth, can you share the screen? Thank you, Parth. Moving further, I would like to briefly mention the structure of the event. Prameya incorporates lectures, discussions from honorees in various fields in the lines with the theme, which is Cities for People. This will go hand in hand with a series of interactive formal and informal events that are planned as a student body initiative to make the event more engaging and lucrative. It's my pleasure to extend a special honor in welcoming our esteemed guest for today, Mr. Bimal Patel, President, CEPT University, to launch the event, which will be followed by the much awaited keynote address by our guest of honor, Professor Gehl. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I hope that today's lecture inspires ideas and discussions in formulating ways we see our cities. This will further aid us in devising strategies to make our cities a better place for people here tonight. Thank you again for being here tonight. With this, we officially mark the commencement of 3 days long event. Thank you.
Well, now I would like to invite Niveda, Academic Secretary, FPPG, to launch the Prameya edition of Faculty of Planning newsletter.
Thank you so much, Vidisha. I, Niveda Ramesh, am extremely honored to represent the student body and present the Faculty of Planning newsletter. The FP newsletter is a student body initiative and has been actively functioning since its inception in the year 2017. provides a window to the academic, cultural, and social initiatives that are undertaken by students of FP CEPT, along with the works done by the FP community beyond the realms of the university. With a global outreach to our vast alumni network, the newsletter attempts to knit the community together and grow stronger. Utilizing the platform of Prameya 20, as mentioned, we aim to acknowledge the achievements and the talents of the students of the Faculty of Planning Department and the CEPT family as a whole. Keeping this in mind, we are very proud to present to you the Prameya edition of the newsletter. In this edition, we will be covering various speakers that are being present for the event in the coming 3 days, and exclusive special interviews with our alumni and works by select students who have been working hard to make this world a better place during the pandemic and beyond. We hope you have a great read. Thank you.
Before we move on to the introduction of our guest speaker tonight, just a small instruction. We will have a question and answer session after the lecture, a 15-minute question and answer session. I request the viewers to jot down your questions to the chat box to your right. And even while the lecture is on, feel free to write. Only I can see your questions. It is not open, the audience cannot view it. So just in the interest of time, we will avoid repetition of questions, and we will club similar questions. So please feel free to jot down your questions. With that, I would now request Dr. Bimal Patel, President, CEPT University, to introduce our very special guest speaker for the evening.
Thank you very much. It is truly a delight to see all the students that have come together. It would have been much better if we were all on campus, and I'm sure you're all feeling like that. The campus looks, I go there sometimes, it feels dead, without any life. All the life seems to have gone online, which is one way of doing it. And I can see that you're all very active and working on things. But it would be such a joy if we were all on campus and inviting Professor Jan Gehl to our campus. I've had the great honor of hearing Professor Jan Gehl when I was a student. I betray my age when I say this, but I was a student at one time at the University of California in Berkeley, and my professor Peter Bosselman, who held Professor Jan Gehl in high regard, and who had invited him to give a talk to a class. I was very privileged. There were just, I think, about 20 or 25 of us. And it was a very special lecture, because here was this person who had started at that time doing a lot of work to make our cities more livable. He was working in Europe, and today when you look at European cities, they are some of the most wonderful places to walk around in and live in, and we go there as tourists. Much of what we see today in European cities can be traced back to the kind of struggles that Professor Jan Gehl made early in the 70s. So this is, it's a great joy for me to, after all these years, I'm talking about somewhere in the mid-80s, and now I'm here invited, in part of a program where he is invited. I also had the privilege of listening to Professor Jan Gehl in 2015 at some conference in London that was organized by Bloomberg. And I heard the lecture. I was reminded of his fantastic work. In his lecture, you will see he's a very inspiring speaker. And there in 2015, I had already invited him to our convocation in 2016. And I had requested him that you must come to Ahmedabad. You must be our commencement speaker. You must speak in Ahmedabad, and you must also hold a public lecture. Unfortunately, it was not possible. His traveling schedule at that time was taking him to Australia and some other places, and he could not make it. So I'm thrilled that that you have managed to get him here, if not in person, at least online. And so, congratulations to all of you. It's truly wonderful that you have got him here. Let me just go through some very basic information about him. Professor Jan Gehl co-founded Gehl Architects in 2000 with Haley Schultz, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, and held a partner's position until 2011. He's currently a senior advisor at Gehl Architects. He continues to research and develop the people-first approach through his books and lectures. Over the course of his career, he has focused on improving the quality of urban life by reorienting city design towards the pedestrian and cyclist, and has published several books, including Life Between Buildings, Cities for Peoples, New City Spaces, Public Life, New City Life, How to Study Public Life, and most recently, People Cities. He's an honorary fellow of RIBA, AIA, RAIC, and PIA. We're really honored to have you here, Professor Gehl. And I must say that one of his books has also been published in Marathi. We had talked at that time of trying to translate one of his books into Gujarati. Because of so many things going on, this has not happened. It's really important that it should happen. And so maybe we will make it happen soon. And then get you over in person so that you can come and launch the book in person. Welcome, Professor Gehl. I'm very thankful that you have agreed to doing this, and we all look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and welcome. I can clearly remember I was invited to your university in Ahmedabad, and I was so sorry I could not come at that point. I can completely follow your sorrow of seeing the dead campus. We all want to have people around us, to have a lively setting, to be able to meet. And I can surely understand you in your wish that the campus will again come really much alive when all you guys come back to studies. When that day comes, I will love to come and visit you in person, and maybe we can even publish a book. That would be wonderful. And certainly I will make a point of visiting you when you like it to happen and when the world situation allows us to do so. I have a daughter who's a professor of medicine. She's very strict with me, telling me what to do and what not to do, but we will overcome that. I was very moved by hearing that you were present it was in 1985, I guess, in Berkeley, where we met. And that was very nice to hear about that you were there and again there in London many years later. Now we are here, and I prepared some slides, a presentation for you, and tell me when to start. Now?
Yes, sir, you can start now, sir. Yeah.
Now comes the great moment of technology, where we shall see what we can do. Ahmedabad. Here we are. Now we are closer. Does it work?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
It works.
Yes, it does.
Oh, glory, glory, glory. We have won over the technology. Okay, guys, I will give you a keynote speech on the subject of how to make livable cities in the 21st century. And my main point is the importance of putting people first. There is much confusion about the future of cities, very great confusion. I went for a couple of years ago to a conference in Mumbai, and they had this poster, Building for the Future and Restoring the Past. I went around and asked everybody about this poster. Is this showing the future or is this the past? And everybody say, this is the future. And I got very worried because it looked like Atlanta in America 20, 40 years ago. Then I went to another conference with the UN Habitat. And lo and behold, I found the same poster with great freeways, but now there were 6 windmills and 2 hospitals. But still there's confusion. Is this the future or what is the future? We hear constantly especially from the automobile industry, that when the automatic cars arrive, they will solve all the problems we ever had. When I look at this picture from Ford about the future, I'm not sure I want this future at all. I may even be glad that I'm very old and will never see this future. I think it's an awful city, if you ask me. But other people say, that if we can't solve all the problems with automatic cars, don't panic, because then we have drones and helicopters. They will solve the rest of the problems. They will buzz all over the sky and we'll not be able to hear a thing in our cities because of all these things happening in the sky. Then we hear other people say, don't worry, because soon we will have the smart city and all the problems will be solved. There is one characteristic of all these future ideas, that is that they are very technocratic, they are built on specialized technology, and they are very expensive, and they demand a lot of investments to introduce. And I've seen in many places that people say, let's wait for all these things to happen. There's no reason to start with the future because the future depends on all these gimmicks which people are working on. And we can ask if the technological gimmicks will actually solve the problems of quality in cities. I think not, because the quality of life in the cities will, as it always has been, depend on the policies and what we want. One of my colleagues have made this little series. He said, this is the situation today. The cities are full of cars, of noise and whatever. They are filling the whole space with cars. Maybe in the future, we'll have electrical cars, and maybe then it will look like this. And then maybe in the future, we'll have automatic cars, electric cars, and then it may be like this. The same problem will repeat itself unless we, as in a political way, decide what kind of city do we want and decide how much space will we give to mobility, to various types of vehicles, whether they be electric or automatic. As far as I can see, all this is something which many of the Western countries may be able to pay a little, to invest a little bit of it. It will be very expensive. But to me, the real problems in the world of city planning and urban design, they are found in the third world countries. And the great majority of the growth in cities in the coming 20 years or 30 years will happen in Africa and Southeast Asia. And that's why we will have to find something which is usable for all cities all over the world, and not only for those who have enough money to invest in very expensive mechanical gear. So instead of waiting for the expensive technology, which only some of us will be able to afford some of it, maybe we actually already have ideas and examples which could serve as models for better cities all over the world. To explain this more carefully, I'll go back to the 20th century, where, in my point, we have inherited two major problems, two major planning paradigms, which have immensely influenced our city planning, and both of them have been destructive to a humanistic city, to a people-oriented city. Before the modernism started in the 20s and 30s, we actually had what we call the good old days. And I have some pictures here from various parts of the world where you can see that all the human settlements, they looked very much the same, because they were all based on Homo sapiens. They were based on our bodies. They were based on our senses. They were made for people to meet and to move about in. And that was logically, they got this kind of configuration. All this was changed with the modernistic movement, starting in the 20s, developing in the 30s, and especially after 1960, the modernism really took off as a dominating paradigm for planning. If we go back to the original ideas of Corbusier and other of the original planners, they started to say cities are bad. It's not good for people to live in cities. They shall live outside of cities. They shall live in isolated buildings. They should live in, he called this one his vertical garden city, because everybody could see some grass. Later on, they could only see the parking lot. But he also condemned, don't make streets, don't make squares, make grass for people and put them in vertically, and they will be happily ever after. This was a fantastic manipulation with Homo sapiens. It was the greatest manipulation ever with the way we built our settlements and cities. Before the modernism, we always focused on spaces. Cities were made up of spaces, and in the spaces could be streets, squares, parks. That's where we moved about, that's where we met, that's where we traded, that's where everything happened, and the cities were made of spaces, and life was going on in the spaces. With the modernism, the whole focus moved from the spaces to the objects. Suddenly, the only thing which was interesting was the buildings, and whatever was not built upon was leftover space. And there's nothing so unuseful, so useless for people as leftover space. This is Corbusier's dream of a new Paris, much better Paris. He suggested we take down Paris and build 24 high-rise towers where the Parisians could look out and see their wonderful city from above. That was some of the ideas. If we think of the old cities, this is actually my home city of Copenhagen. And when I think of my city, I can remember all the spaces. I can remember many, many streets and many squares and many parks, but only 2-3 buildings, the cathedral, the royal castle, and the town hall, maybe. The city is made of spaces with a few important public monuments. In the famous map by Nolly, made in 1748, the city is presented only as something made up of spaces. And even in this map, it's interesting because the inside of public buildings, where you public have access, the inside of churches, of courthouses, of townhouses, political buildings, that's also space for life. So this is Rome. It is a matter of spaces. All this changed with the modernists. Now suddenly cities did not consist of spaces where people could be comfortable and move about. Now the cities consisted of objects. So in the new cities, we remember only a number of funny buildings, but we don't remember any spaces at all, because nothing was done to make nice spaces in these places. Also, modernism set free the architects because suddenly what the architects did was, of course, the important thing to make objects, and the more funny you could make your objects, the more you could be a star architect and you could sell your funny towers all over the world. But there's nothing which points that quality of life is better in this shape or the other shape. So we got obsessed with the objects and forgot about the spaces for the people and where life in the cities were going on. When I look back on modernism, I really think that was a goodbye to the concern for people. These modernists, they didn't know anything about that they manipulated with people. They thought that if you had running water in your residence and you have a toilet, then you will be happily ever after. But actually, taking away the spaces and giving people leftover space was a very, very severe manipulation. The other big paradigm which has dominated the 20th century, second half of 20th century, has been the car invasion. Of course, it started before, but from 1960 onwards, it started really to move into the cities, and they filled all the leftover spaces left over by the modernists was filled by cars. It was very practical to have leftover space. Then you could have freeways and streets and parking lots. And then finally, the whole city became one maze of cars. This is Moscow. And here you can see a cross between a parking place and a pedestrian crossing and a training ground for slalom for the Winter Olympics, where you can move. If we go back to that time, 1960, when all these things started to happen, we may ask, what did we as professionals and communities knew about quality for people at that time? Absolutely, virtually nothing. It was only shortly after this period that we heard the first voice. It was Jane Jacobs from New York, which wrote the book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, where she said, if the modernists and the motorists are to form our cities, the cities will be dead and uninteresting and unlivable, and it will be the end of great cities for people. She fought vigorously against a modernization of Manhattan, where they wanted to take all the nice areas of Manhattan down and build enormous freeways and enormous skyscrapers. They succeeded in stopping this movement. And she wrote her book where also she said, for God's sake, planners and architects, instead of sitting in your studios and make series about how people ought to live and how things ought to be, look out of the windows and see how people use the spaces, how people use their cities, how they meet each other, where the children play, where the old people go for walks, and how life is going on in real life, instead of sitting there making all these series about what people ought to do, so forth. I know much about modernism because I was trained as a good modernist. I graduated in 1960, and I was trained as an architect in the 50s. And what did we learn in the 50s in School of Architecture? We learned to make objects. Here's a professor. He was the one who said a good housing area is something which looks good from the freeway. And here to the right is some of his projects, which of course is very interesting from the freeway, but one may ask, is this a very good place for people to live, for children to grow up? That was never considered. I got my degree in 1960. I was very young. I rushed out of university to do all these wonderful things for people and make all this modernistic stuff. Then I married a psychologist. And suddenly we had new questions in the house. Why are you architects not interested in people? Why don't they teach you anything about people in School of Architecture? Why do you think your professors go out 4 o'clock in the morning and take photographs of the monuments to be sure there are no people on the pictures which can distract the students during the lectures? Have you thought about that? That was, for a young architect, very strong medicine. And we started to discuss that between social sciences and architecture and planning, there was an enormous gap. They knew a lot of things we didn't know anything about. But certainly, whatever we built influenced the quality of life of the people, but we knew nothing about it. In the end, I had to go back to School of Architecture for 40 more years. And I went back to find out what they forgot to tell me when I was there first time, just to realize that they didn't know anything and that we had to find out ourselves how the built environment influences the behavior of people and the quality of life. To make a long story somewhat short, I spent the next 40 years sitting on my behind and watching people. That was the main methods. I never trained in research. I just started to observe systematically what happened and how did people use our architecture, our cities. And just, I can give you a few examples of some of the thousands of little studies I did over all these years with many students, including those in Berkeley, Mr. President. We studied in many different countries and we found more or less the same results every time because we realized that it was Homo sapiens who were living in all these countries. Just example here. This is School of Architecture in Copenhagen. They moved to a new area, an old army buildings, army barracks, and they called in a very good landscape architect, and he was asked to do some landscaping. He made beautiful lawns with an iron, a rusty iron edge, just as they shall be nowadays. And then you have in the foreground the corner, and all the students to architecture, they come around that corner, and then they see the building in the background, which is where you can have coffee. And when the students see where you can have coffee, do they go in right angles in various patterns? No, they go straight for the coffee. That's, people are very careful with energy, if their own energy. So the students, of course, went straight for the coffee. The architect could really have foreseen that and made another landscaping here. But instead, he had to come out 2 weeks later and finish his project based on what people would do rather than what he thought they should do. That's one example. Another example is this about that we have in all our studies found a distinct pattern that people prefer to go out and stay at the edge of a place if they are to spend some time. It's very logical because at the edge, all our senses are in front, and at the edge you can follow everything happening, and your back is protected, and you can sit there and watch everything. You're very comfortable. So we have this edge effect all over the world, in buses, in stations, in whatever. It's a typical example is a ballroom where there's dancing in the middle, and then when the music stops, you go out to the edge. And then there's activity again in the middle, and then you go out to the edge. Edge effect, very common for Homo sapiens. But then we started to speculate. Does this also account for architects? Will architects behave like ordinary, clever people? Of course, we at once started a big study, and we found that architecture students all over the world, they were just like ordinary people. They loved to sit by the edge because that's what is built into our body, and that's where our senses are. And then when you realize that architects are like normal people, you can ask who will put up such things and who will expect anybody to sit there and be comfortable? No one. These are just some examples, but I started very early in the 60s to collect all these studies, and we have continued all the years. After a while, we started to do more comprehensive studies where we studied entire life of a city. We started to make books about it and put it down, document what we found. And much to my joy, I saw the books starting to be spread all over the world in many, many languages. One of the books I have especially put my heart into is Cities for People. The story about Cities for People, which came out 2010, was that after 40 years of studying people, a foundation approached me and said, "Hey, Jan, you have been studying people now for 40 years. You've learned much. Couldn't you sit down and write down everything we know now about this subject while you can still remember it before you get too old?" And then they gave me some money so I could have some assistance. And then we set about, we made the book, came out in 2010, and it's now, it's now available in all major languages. Maybe Gujarati is not upon them, but certainly Marathi. And I'm actually very humbled and proud that in just 10 years, this book is out now in 39 different languages, all corners of the world. Also, I'm very proud that all my books are out in Chinese. They started very early to translate my books and publish them. And I know in China that they're all over China because I've signed most of them. That was a fantastic work. sometimes the students do 2 times around the block, lining up to have signatures. But the book is all over China. What makes me sad now in my older days are the fact that they never had time in China to read the books. But maybe they'll find time in the future. Anyway, they have the books. If they had read the books, they will have realized this is a little study done by one of the people in Gehl Architects. And we've been advising a number of Chinese projects. And here's a project of a number of high-rise buildings. And then we took all the buildings and make sure how many square meters is this. Here we are. And then you could have made, by the same number of square meters, you could have made a nice city with squares and parks and streets and buildings which were only 5-6 story high, instead of this crazy high-rise forest over here. So if they read my book, they'll come up with the city with nice human dimensions instead of all these silly towers. Summing up by now, I will say that after 50 years of research, we know a lot about how to make humanistic city planning, humanistic architecture, how to make much better cities for people. We have the knowledge, there's a number of books about this. Also, at this point, we can see that we have new challenges. Many people have been very sick and tired of the city where people have not enough room and not enough dignity to meet other people, so that the city of people for people, the livable, lively city, that's actually immensely popular now, and even more so as we have all the screens and all the indirect communication, and we have more leisure time in many parts of the world. And we can see that the wish for good people spaces is growing. We can see that throughout the history, the greatest interest of Homo sapiens has been other people. The people in the city is much more interesting than the architecture in the city. And we demand really to have better places. We always had people spaces. They were taken away by the cars and by the modernists. Now we want them back. We become increasingly obsessed and concerned about the climate situation. We know we have to do a lot of things. And of course, if we bicycle and walk more, if we use public transportation more, and if we make good public realm, it would be better for the public transportation also. By these means, we know that we can do something to have a better climate. Also, we've got a new problem by now. The doctors call it the sitting syndrome, that for 50 years we've built cities all over the world, which invites people to drive cars, and they are now sitting from early morning to late night and doesn't move enough, and they die out of sitting now. The doctors say that more people die of sitting than of smoking in America by now. So the doctors say, actually the World Health Organization, they say, make cities so that you invite people to walk and bike as much as possible. That is our health action plan for the world. So that is the message to us. If we look at these demands, that we would like livable, sustainable, and healthy cities, and actually we have more and more old people, and it should be important that we make cities which are nice to be old in. If we look carefully after being careful with the people, with the pedestrians, with the public life, with the bicycles, we realize that all these items are addressed by such a people-centered policy. coffee time. Then we can ask, are there cities where they do a really great effort to invite people to walk and bicycle as much as possible in the course of their daily day doing? Yes, actually, there are cities all over the world which is doing this, and this is a tendency which is definitely growing at this point in history. I could invite you to Melbourne. It's just an ordinary English colonial city, was very much dominated by offices. The city center was completely unuseful, but now they have decided to make it vital, make it livable. They have done a lot to have more people living in the city too. And they said, in Melbourne, we walk, we don't drive. And they've been very good in making all the sidewalks 8 meters wide, put granite on the sidewalks, put trees on all the sidewalks, made fine urban furniture. And they've seen a fantastic upsurge of walking in the city because it's a lovely city to walk in. I would say Melbourne is just like Paris, but the weather is much better than in Paris. And Melbourne, if you see any study of most livable cities in the world, you can see Melbourne is sky high, number 1, 2, or 3, always Melbourne. Melbourne is the best city in the Southern Hemisphere. And that was done by architects and urban designers. And I had the great joy to be very much involved in this work. And if you don't know what to do, I could recommend you to move to Melbourne. It's a nice city. It's been made nice by architects and urban designers. Then I could tell you about Sydney. I started working in Sydney in 2006, and it has been very hard work to get the buses and the cars out of Main Street, Sydney. You know, Sydney has a wonderful waterfront, but the city center is really awful. We did study it carefully and found that it was really bad, and we made a plan to improve it, also a plan for introducing bicycle system, like also we did in Melbourne. Just recently, they've started to see the whole plan come through. This was Main Street, Sydney, 10 years ago. This is Main Street, Sydney today, where instead of all the cars and buses, they have a light rail going up and down, and the whole street is for pedestrians. Here's a view from the town hall in Sydney. This is what the mayor looked out at before, and this is how the scenery looks today. We worked in New York, where the mayor had a very strong idea of making a much better people city in New York with all the cars which have dominated for so many years. One of the major things which changed in New York was that we were able to transform Times Square into a people space by closing Broadway. We actually found out that they didn't need Broadway for traffic. So we were able to close Broadway in a number of places. And here is Times Square in 2007. Here is Times Square after it was closed. That was in 2009. At once it was taken over by people. Now they made 50 other places like this, and all these places have been taken from the automobiles. Also, they made all these bicycle lanes so that as an invitation for more walking and more bicycling and more public transportation in New York. Other cities where I've not worked, they are also working very hard. This is from the city of Vilnius in Lithuania, where the mayor goes around with this one and say, don't park in my bike lanes. It's very efficient. Another city like Bucharest in Romania, they have a little problem with the traffic, but now they have my book in Romanian and they will sort out the problem very quickly. Then I could tell you about Moscow. At some point, I told about these other cities in Moscow, and then this guy came galloping up and say, "Hey, we want to humanize Moscow. When can you come?" And as usual, I say, "I come on Monday." So we went to Moscow, and we were shocked because Moscow was completely given over to automobiles. After the end of the Soviet Union, all these oligarch and all these setting free the economy in various ways, and they could use their money for nothing else but buying cars, and they bought cars. It was completely inundated with cars, and the life in the city was almost killed by traffic. This is a little residential street. Have a good time here. This is Main Street, Moscow, a city of 14 million people. And because they thought they had not enough parking, they decided to park also on the sidewalk on Main Street, Moscow. And what was left to people, 14 million people, was 1 meter of sidewalk. During this project in Moscow, of course, I met the mayor, Mr. Sobyanin, and we had a dinner, and he said, "Oh, what will be in your report?" And I said, "Oh, Mr. Sobyanin, I think that your idea of parking on all the sidewalks is not a very good idea. I will have to mention it in my report. Now, over there, they are a little bit sensitive to critics." So he just make some notes. And when I came back to Moscow next time, there was no parking on sidewalks because they have very efficient democracy. And then if you forget about it, the mayor has some cars with cranes, and then your car is lifted out and taken to Siberia, maybe. This was the start of a fantastic transformation in Moscow. This is how we found the main street in Moscow in 2011. And this is how the same street looked in 2013. Instead of the cars, we have benches. Instead of a gray street, we have a green street. And we have a wider sidewalk, and we have, it's much more, actually, they were found out they could widen the sidewalks by making the lanes of the cars narrower. Now they've taken lanes away, and the completely different situation has appeared. This is a corner along the main street in Moscow. In 2012, we saw all these effects, all these things have moved into this square, completely ruining the square. It was not a parking space, but it was a space where you could put all kinds of rubbish and advertisements. This was cleaned up now. This space looks like this. It's a completely new story. And they put in granite and proper pavement and trees all over the city. Also, they put up swings many places in the squares. What should you do on a square? They thought maybe we can make swings. And it appears that people in Moscow, they're very fond of swinging. So they're swinging from early morning to late night in all generations. Then in 2018, I was back in Moscow to see all the results. And they said, "Oh, Jan, you must realize we've got a serious new problem in Moscow. We've got a Moscow baby boom because of all the benches you put into the parks, all the boulevards, all the swings in the squares. People meet, and we have baby boom. That's because of humanistic city planning." And I said, "Oh, I'm very proud if I can make a baby boom in Moscow because of the humanistic city planning." So that was this story. I'll go on to the next and final story. That's a story about my hometown of Copenhagen. They started in 1962 to take the cars out of the city. They realized that the spaces were not wide enough for both cars and people, so they had to take cars out some of the places, and gradually they've taken cars out more and more spaces. In the beginning, nobody thought it would be possible to take cars out because the traffic will completely break down and congestion would follow. It proved to be not a major problem. Also, they said it was too cold. You will never have the people in Denmark walking and sitting and enjoying. Again, the moment they made the spaces, people started to walk and enjoy just as people in all other countries. And if it was cold, they could take an extra sweater, so what? This is how Copenhagen looked in 1962 when the first street was closed to traffic. Copenhagen is famous for one thing. It was the first city in the world where a whole city was studied, where the life of the city was studied just as carefully as the traffic engineers study the traffic. We at the University Urban Design Department, we started already in 1967 to publish how the people in the city was faring, and we continued studying and producing all these books, and that has had an enormous influence on the politics of the city and has actually led to Copenhagen being called one of the most livable cities in the world. So there's an interesting example of university and city working together, and the whole thing resulting in a much better city. This is how Copenhagen looked in the 50s. This is how it looks today. Many of the places, all the places have been changed from car places to people places. This is how a stretch of the waterfront looked in 1980. This is how it looks today. And actually, all the parking along the harbor has disappeared now and been taken out, and people have been given back. And what they are using the city very, very extensively. And this is what has happened in Copenhagen. Here you can see all the spaces and quaysides and streets which has over the years been given over to people activities. And the interesting thing is that people have gradually become more and more interested in public life, in walking, in using these spaces. Copenhagen also has a policy, an official policy from the city council. We will be the best city in the world for people. And they have a number of goals here, which they can check if they are met at various times. Copenhagen also very early started to prioritize bicycling, and actually they have bicycle lanes all over the city. They have a good curb to the traffic and a good curb to the pedestrians, and all generations can use these bicycle lanes. Over the year, when all these bicycle infrastructure was present, a bicycle culture has developed, and many transportation systems have changed. So one of the things being the cargo bike, where you can bring your kids or your grandmother around in the city on the bicycle lanes. The bicycle system is integrated with the public transportation system, so you can take your bike in the train for free, and then you can actually go 30, 40 kilometers, pedal down to the station, take the bicycle in the coach, and then pedal in the other end, and then you have a long journey made with bicycle and public transportation. Lately they have been following a policy of making bicycling so easy that it's always easier to take your bicycle in Copenhagen than to take your car. You can always get faster and more convenient to various places. And if you are too old to bicycle, they have a system of that they say that old people need to have wind in their hair. So if you can't bike, you are being biked. and they take the old peoples around in the city and they love it. What has happened in Copenhagen is that an impressive culture of using bicycle has gradually evolved. We are now up to the figure of 49% of all who goes to work and studies in the city are commuting on bicycles. 10 years ago, it was 10% less. So what we have learned from Copenhagen, and actually from the other cities we have worked in, is that you give good invitations for people to walk, to participate in public life and to do bicycling. There will be more walking, more public life, more bicycling. And to me, that is exactly what we need in the 21st century, that people use their own muscles and they enjoy life in the city and enjoy meeting the other people in society and the neighborhood, instead of being chased all over the city and being harassed by pollution and noise and whatever problems there are. I will go back to the first question I mentioned, cities for the future, what to do. There are dreams, there are worries. I'll start by saying what you should not do. Don't do Dubai. Dubai is motorism and modernism, and it's very difficult, as you can see from the guy over to the left, it's very difficult to get across the street. What shall we do? Shall we do Venice? It's a city without cars. There never were cars in Venice. They couldn't get in. It's great neighborhoods for all generations, but the mobility is not so efficient. So here you have all mobility, but no place to be. Here you have endless many good places to be, but no mobility. I think somewhere in between that we have, maybe it would be a good idea to try worldwide some humanistic city planning, to put people first, to make it better for people to walk, to make better conditions for public life, to make better conditions for elderly people to promenade and to take in the life, and to make, and the interesting thing about this policy is that it's very cheap compared to other policies. The infrastructure for pedestrians and bicycles are very cheap, and it solves a lot of problems in the cities. And it's so cheap and so common that it can be used in cities all over the world, regardless of the economy. And finally, we can say you can start tomorrow. You don't have to wait for the automatic cars. Being a good humanistic urban designer, you can start tomorrow and have wonderful cities as being the result. Thank you very much, Ahmedabad.
Thank you so much for your talk, sir. Well, we have a bunch of questions lined up, and all the questions are very different, very interesting, but very different questions. I would quickly begin with the first question that talks about the context of India and how, when you spoke about increasing public spaces in the cities. In India, we have always seen a trend that a lot of these spaces have already been occupied or already belong to someone, maybe not in the real sense, but sometimes, for example, it is occupied by informal settlements or homegrown settlements. Sometimes it's occupied by informality. Other times, maybe it's a tribe that's occupying that land. And there has been instances where these spaces have been taken from these set of people and given to the other set of people in the city as a public space. So the question here says, then in that instance, in this example, then these spaces are not really public, right? And also, I would just add another question that addresses a similar thing, that gentrification in Indian cities, or say exclusion in Indian cities, has also resulted in rising crimes because you're taking spaces from someone and giving it to a certain set of people. So what are your thoughts on this?
I will not dare to suggest what you should do in India. I don't know enough about the situation. And I know that wherever I have been working in South America, in North America, in Australia, also in Asian cities, there are different solutions and there are different problems in all of them. What I have been interested in is a mindset where you try to think about the people who are to live in the city and use the city and find out how you could make a good city for the people. And one of the things I have suggested very strongly is that maybe I can go back to the mayor of New York who said, Michael Bloomberg was his name. He said, "In God we trust, now bring me the data." And we found it very, very important that we get data and documentation about the people who use the city so that we can contact the politicians and say, you have so many cars and you do all these things, but you have so many people and they have very bad conditions, so that we can have wider sidewalks, better conditions. Data has been found to be very strong, but I don't know exactly what you should do in India. You will have to, each of you guys will have to fight for a more humanistic approach to city planning and architecture. Make sure that the students learn about people in schools of architecture.
Thank you for your answer, sir. The next question is based on the pandemic. It says that this crisis of pandemic is not going to end anytime soon. And the researchers say that there are more. So how do you think the landscaping of cities is going to change or altered as a response to these critical times, pandemics or epidemics, where norms such as social distancing become a mandate to keep people apart, reducing the sense of belongingness and affecting mental health of people?
I have looked into, actually, the human settlements, the cities have been, over the years, over centuries, there's been earthquakes, there's been floods, there's been wars, there's been bombing, there's been epidemics, pandemics. There's been a number of things happening. And what is quite obvious is that Homo sapiens has a biological history and has a set of senses. And he always go back to being a human being after a time. When the war is over, he starts to live up again. We'll see the same with the COVID, that when we have a vaccine, like we have vaccine to other diseases, we'll see that very quickly we'll go back to what we used to do, go to sport matches and go to parties and whatever. Especially student parties is important. Here in Denmark, we have a great problem with the students which are back in university, and they party all the time, and it's very bad for COVID-19. But that's another story. But I'm sure that man, and as a species, he will not accept if the cities are not in human scale. He will not feel comfortable in spaces which are too wide. It's not a good idea to make sidewalks double widths. That's waste of time and waste of money. Find a vaccine and it will be back to normal, more or less. There's no evidence in history that architects have solved epidemics. That's the doctors who solve that. The architects can solve a number of other problems which has to do with society, loneliness, neighborhoodliness, stress, traffic accidents, whatever. That's architects and planners can do. But with the virus and the and the bacteria, it's a doctor's table.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to the next question that says, while modernism has deprived cities of the human scale, what do you think are the most important elements that, if applied to the existing systems of modernist cities like Brasilia, Dubai, could transform them into cities for people? Also, how important is the idea of cities from people in order to make cities for people? Another question that deals with Dubai as a context is that this person is writing from Dubai, and he says that due to the climate, it's very difficult for people to walk on the streets of Dubai, and it's perceived that cars are necessary. So how do you think that this could be, similar to the previous questions, elements that could change the approach?
Several times I've been involved in projects where cities or universities or housing areas wants to change modernistic housing into nice people-oriented settlements or places. It's very difficult because many of the decisions taken where all the things are too wide and too high and the climatic situation is too harsh and whatever. So it's very important that you from the start apply the demands to a more human scale and to a better people environment. Of course, something can be done, and there are examples here and there of something being done. About Dubai, I always had the idea that they should never have started to build a city that place because it is so difficult. I know from Singapore, where actually we've been involved in making a bicycle plan for Singapore. Who would have thought that with their climate? But anyway, if they had trees to cool down, they can still have a rather decent situation on the ground. They don't have to dig into the underground and move about in tubes. And also, you find also in India that in the morning hours and the afternoon, evening hours, more life is going on, and then you adapt to the climate by staying away in the middle of the day, if that's possible. In our part of the world, it's the other. We come out in the middle of the day and go in the evening, but we have different climates. Climate is a very, very important factor, and the idea to solve the climate problem by endless technology, whether it be cars or cooling and digging down into the ground, whatever. I think we have lots of examples where you can build with the climate in all parts of the world.
Thank you, sir. So this question, the next question actually takes us back to the 1960s. It asks that as a person, I'm so sorry, I have a dog barking.
What's the name of the dog?
We call it Oli.
Okay. Go on. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll continue. I'll try to continue. It says that as a person post 1960s, someone who was advocating for bottom-up approach in the times that, in post-war modernism was at its peak, and the governments and most architects and planners were advocating for it. What were the challenges you faced with an approach that was challenging this popular notion of modernism?
I'm not sure I understood your question correct, but I think it is of course important that we use building systems which are cheap and practical and can be multiplied with technology, but then we have to add this extra dimension of humanity, of people concern because the modernists were really very technocratic and they didn't know a shit about what they were doing. Sorry for the wording.
Thank you so much for your answers, sir. It's an exciting experience for us to deal with the public realm, especially in India, considering the hidden negotiations that take place in every nook and corner of the city. Inspired by your writings, we often investigate our cities with a close lens, since, like you said, that something happens because something happens because something happens. And we're often baffled at the existing scenarios of the public spaces and life between buildings in India. And it takes a while to gulp all that in one go. 5 years is not even close to how long you have spent looking at people in cities. We probably, as students, probably haven't even lived as much as you've looked at people in cities. But looking at our fast changing cities, public spaces from once being never defined, this is India, or conserved, but those that just effortlessly existed are now in danger of current trends of formalization and standardization sometimes. And we as students and practitioners of future need to be continuously inspired and reminded of the life and humanity we're designing for, and hoping to shape our work for happier people. And as we embark on this journey of multiple visions and ambitions, we often look up to people who have taken up the path and trudged on it before. So thank you so much for joining us, spending your evening with us today, sir, and inspiring us with your talk. I thank you wholeheartedly from the entire CEPT fraternity and student body. With that, I request Niveda, she can present the vote of thanks on behalf of the student body.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, Vidisha. I am extremely honored to take this opportunity to present a formal vote of thanks, if I must say, to extend my sincere thanks to Professor Gehl for sharing his impactful journey with all of us present here. We cannot thank you enough, sir, for this thought-provoking and insightful presentation. You are an inspiration for the fraternity at large and an effectuator in creating cities for people. Your extensive work in your research for creating quality urban life and humanizing cities is an inspiration for young urbanists like us. And we assure you that you are passing the baton successfully in encouraging us to consider people-first approach. Thank you very much, sir, for being here and spending your valuable time with all of us. It is truly an honor.
I should thank you very much. It's been a great joy for me, a great pleasure for me to be with you tonight. And I wish you all the best in your studies and in your future work. We as architects and urban designers can do so much good for mankind, but we have to know what we are doing. And I wish you good luck with getting your values right and getting your knowledge all right so that you know what to do. Good luck.
Thank you so much, sir. We are extremely grateful. And so, can you present the screen again, Parth? I would like to say a few words there. We are extremely thrilled, sir, to share this as a token of gratitude from the entire student body here, a memory of this online interaction that you had with the students at CEPT University here in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And further, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Bimal Patel for gracing us with his presence today. And a very special thank you to all the faculties at CEPT University for constantly encouraging us to put up events like these, which inspire and keep us motivated to do more. Last but not least, I would love to thank the entire student body of Faculty of Planning for making this event possible. Thank you so much.
So it's time to say goodbye.
Sadly, yeah.
Okay. Goodbye and good luck.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.